Also, the president of the West Texas Trail Association, Mr. Bob Fowler. You're here, I believe. He's somewhere. There he is. And noted author Bill Neely, author of the book The Last Comanche Chief. And Mr. Neely, would you please stand? Thank you, sir. All right, well, you have your programs with you, so we're going to, again, thank everybody for being here. We have a lot of great speakers here for you. The first person that's going to speak is Dr. Mike Gilbreth. Dr. Gilbreth is the former Western Texas College president. He was born and raised on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River near St. Louis and started his career in newspapers, television, and ultimately as a radio news broadcaster and commentator. Dr. Gilbreth joined the faculty at Lewis and Clark Community College in 1986, teaching radio, public speaking, and humanities. He ultimately earned a doctorate in higher education from Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Gilbreth accepted the presidency in 2001 of Frontier Community College in Fairfield, Illinois, and with his appointment, Dr. Gilbreth became the first ever Illinois Community College graduate to become an Illinois Community College president. In 2007, he became the president of Western Texas College, and when he left that post, he was named president of John A. Logan College in May of 2012. Resigning that post in late 2015, Dr. Gilbreth's current position, he is associate provost with the St. Louis Community College and administers the Wildwood campus. Not to mention, Dr. Gilbreth is the reason that I'm here, and a longtime friend and colleague as we used to roam the hallways of Civic Memorial High School together. And of course, many have heard of our outstanding legendary exploits in the field of athletic competition. Well, maybe not legendary, but a lifelong friend indeed, and a very passionate educator and believing in the power and the knowledge of education. Dr. Gilbreth and his wife Carol have 5 children and 5 grandchildren, and Mrs. Gilbreth is here today, and she's a licensed occupational therapist. And if you would, Carol, would you stand? And at this time, I bring to the podium our first speaker, Dr. Mike Gilbreth.
Thank you, Darren. I remember my nickname in high school was Cold Gravy. Because Cold Gravy didn't run, and neither did I. I'm going to take you on a short journey. Trust me, I will connect the points for you at the end of it, but I think it's an important story, and you'll wonder why I'm starting this way. Stay with me if you would, please. I was a divorced father of 3 sons in a small town in southeastern Illinois where I was the president of the college. Met a woman who was going to school there at night and got to know her and asked her the question, what is it you want to do with your life? She, at the time, I know you're going to find it hard to believe that long ago she was 42, but she was 42 then. And she said, I want to become an occupational therapist, and I want to move to Texas. And I said, I understand the occupational therapy part of it, and understand people kept saying to her, you're 42, you'll be 47 before you get the master's degree to be an occupational therapist. And her answer was, and remember this, I'm going to be 47 anyway. I might as well be an occupational therapist. Remember that. So she said, I want to be an occupational therapist and I want to live in Texas. And I said, well, I understand the occupational therapy part of it. I don't understand the Texas part of it. She says, because I'd like to be as close as possible to George Strait. 8 months after, and I have to tell you, that's the last time I dated a student. And 8 months later, we were married, and I took it to heart. I started looking for jobs in Texas, and we just had a couple of really bad failures that didn't work out. And I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Presswood who said, "We'd like to talk to you about the presidency at Western Texas College." And I said, and understand, I'd just been to North Dakota twice, and they'd paid thousands of dollars for me to be there. So I said to him rather glibly, "Okay, well, what would the transportation arrangements be?" And Mr. Presswood said, "Really doesn't matter, you're paying for it." So I called Carol, who was in St. Louis at the time, doing work, and I said, "I don't think we ought to go to Texas. It's going to cost us $1,000. We're going to have to drive down there and fly or whatever." And Carol said, "If I have to get into my personal savings, I don't care if you blow that interview. I want 3 days, 3 glorious days in the Texas sun." And she's getting 3 days right now. The reason I bring her up is because she made a change in her life at midlife that a community college made possible. If it hadn't been for that community college, she would not have pursued that degree. She's the perfect community college success story because of it. Now let's fast forward. I take the job here, and I have a passion for signature art and sculpture. I grew up around it at the college where I was a teacher, and I wanted something like that here. And we went through our first process of strategic planning where we put 50, and I want all the administrators that are here now to be able to look down when I say this. We did 50 projects that we were going to do in 5 years. And my idea of a signature sculpture came in ranked number 50. But I was the president. I was told about the Diamond M Foundation, about the incredible life of C.T. McLaughlin, of his interaction with the Snyder community. And so 3 years into the presidency, I approached Mr. McLaughlin's son, who's here today, to go to lunch in St. Angelo. He was gracious enough to take me from the bank. We sat down and ate lunch. And I want to tell you what happened. My first day on the job, Roy Bartels and Mike Thornton had already queued up a project for the new president. They had all the details worked out. It was on a platter, so that it looked like on my first day I would have a success. And it was the idea of College on the Square. There was a building there. There was a lady that they said I needed to talk to who could help us lease the building down on the square. Her name was Marianne Randalls. I'd never met Marianne before. I was here my first day. And so they took me down. They sat me down next to Marianne. We both had an iced tea. We started rocking on the front porch of the hotel that she owned. And she felt compelled to tell me for an hour the story of Snyder history. Specifically, an hour about the life and times of Quanah Parker. I'm thinking, this is an hour I'm never going to get back out of my life. But I needed that signature. So I sat and I looked like I was interested, and I listened intently to her as she told the story. 3 years later, I'm having lunch with Mr. McLaughlin, and I said, "Sir, I want a signature piece of sculpture for this campus. Would the foundation support it?" And he said, as I was reaching for my iced tea, what would the subject be of this sculpture. And I hadn't thought of that. I had a glitch. I grabbed the iced tea and drank it very slowly. And then Mary Ann flashed into my vision. I remembered bits and pieces of the Quanah Parker story, of a Comanche chief, a great leader, somebody that saw the writing on the wall, that knew what was going to happen to the people that followed him, who made the brave decision to lead them into Fort Sill, to tell them that this was the best thing for them to do. In midlife, he made a career change. He decided to turn things around and do something completely differently with his life. That took courage. And he became a wonderful businessman, a friend to Teddy Roosevelt. He was unbelievably successful. And that's the story I told Mr. McLaughlin. That's the story. That's the image that I want. I want somebody that put together cultures, not only because they were of two cultures, but because they emoted what it was to be a man of two cultures, to bring two warring cultures together. That's the image I wanted. I wanted that right out in front of that history museum, tied together, so that when students came on this campus, besides reading the rules of the West, they knew what this college represented. It represented cultures coming together for the good. I want to wrap up with this. This, for Carol and me, is by the way, if I've forgotten anything, I'm sorry. I wrote the speech in 2011. I actually embraced Terry today, and I didn't squeeze. We're so happy to be here. I can't tell you how pleased we are. We stood out in front here, and we felt his presence. We felt this piece emotes, Terry. It's a magnificent piece of art. I'm so happy. I wish you'd been a little bit faster. But it takes time, doesn't it, sir? And it's wonderful. And let me tell you something. Why it's so fantastic here, it's a magnificent piece of art in front of the best community college in Texas. We will always love Snyder, Texas. It is a special place. It's the best 5 years of our life. Someone asked me about the scar on my forehead. I told Carol this is only a visit. And I have to tell you this. She spent lots of money to be on the front row in Vegas, and she touched George. For her, life is complete. For me, life is complete. Thank you.
He makes it hard to get up here and follow, doesn't he? We're glad you're here, my friend. Our next speaker is Dr. Holly Humphreys. A long list of accomplishments, but a fellow Midwesterner. A doctorate, a PhD in fine arts from Texas Tech University, teaching assistant, lecturer, assistant professor in art education at Texas Tech University and the University of Texas at Austin. But our most recent activity is she's the facilitator of the Quanah Parker Trail, a cultural heritage trail developed at the grassroots level by volunteers throughout the Texas Plains Trail region, one of 10 cultural heritage trail regions of the Texas Historic Commission. Let's give a very warm welcome to Dr. Humphreys.
I wanted Dr. Dreeth to know that I was at the Hutchinson County Museum in Borger, as was Don Parker and Ardith Parker. And when Mr. Gilbreth presented the maquette of his statue, and the proposal was presented to the public. And it is wonderful to finally see it here. All of us gathered here share the opportunity to stand as eyewitnesses to history and experience the monumental symbol and gesture that Western Texas College, artist Terry Gilbreth, and the Parker family are providing on this day. We stand in the lands that were dominated less than 150 years ago by the Comanches, lords of the South Plains. That is only 3 generations ago. After the clash between the two cultures concluded in 1875, and the Comanches, along with their fellow Native Americans, had their way of life irrevocably changed by the onslaught of Western civilization and were swept away, outgunned by the forces of military might, to be sequestered on reservations. All traces of their culture perceptible to a mere panoramic sweep of the human eye vanished from this landscape, unless you knew where and how to look for signs of what had once been. Those signs were bedrock mortars and metates in the ground, smoke-blackened rocks high on promontory points used as signaling sites, or arranged like mysterious glyphic circles inscribed on the land in rings that once surrounded teepees. Poles over 15 feet long leaned up against the trunks of trees and camouflaged by overhanging branches. Flint and projectile points as a cache secretly buried. And the artifacts of ornament buried with the dead and then exposed by the erosive effects of weather, wind, rain, and snow were unearthed by a plow over time. With the raising of this statue of Quanah Parker to stand here, the Comanche are once made visible to the panoramic sweep of the human eye once again. It stands on grounds once imprinted by his moccasins, and what is restored now is a sage and wise watcher over the land and the people. That is all of us. The indigenous people of the North American continent who preceded us, and their descendants, some who are gathered here today, through their antecedent cultures have much to teach us about creating a life forged in harmony with nature and fostered by close friendships made with family. Quanah, over his lifetime, lived among extended families that formed several Apache and Comanche bands: Mescalero, Nacona, Penateca, Quahada. Once consigned to a reservation, he spent the rest of his life forging political, social, religious, and educational ties, treaties, and practices to benefit his family, his Comanche tribe, and all those of the Apache and Kiowa people who shared the confined space and life on the reservation in Indian Territory with him. But through research conducted to create the Quanah Parker Trail, we have come to learn over time how extensively he traveled beyond the confines of that reservation. In both the pre- and post-reservation time period, over the span of his lifetime from 1845 to 1911. From this, I think that always, he longed to be back in the Comancheria, here in the land called Texas, a word that is Indian in origin, meaning allies. first heard by European Americans arriving in the 16th century. I think that Quanah so badly wanted to be back in Texas that after he came into the reservation in 1875, he eventually, over the years, managed to procure a horse-drawn buggy, sometimes pulled by mules, and a fine suit of clothes, and even access to a railway named after him, to get out. So that, disguised in white man's clothes, he could continue to find respite in the freedom afforded by a semblance of the nomadic life, unfettered in spirit as a wanderer, true to his father's legacy and name. His travels throughout the state and lands of Texas, and as far away as Mexico when he rode the Comanche Trail with Tohasan, a Kiowa, all the way to Medicine Lodge, Kansas in 1867, clear to Carlisle, Pennsylvania to keep an eye on the Indian children in boarding school there, and clear to Washington, D.C. countless times, our legend. And so it is that today we can say he returns, a longing for him fulfilled, immortalized in bronze, here in Texas, here in Scurry County, in the bosom of the territorial lands of his Quahada band, within 30 miles even of his last encampment in 1875 as a free roving Indian, to endure now and keep watch over what once was Comanche land and ever has been. It is fitting that he returns here. Born circa 1845 on Elk Creek at the foot of the Wichita Mountains, now referred to as the Quartz Mountains Range, an area that in his lifetime was considered part of Texas, Quanah is a native Texan. In the catalog of outdoor public art in the United States and Texas, there are few statues of Native Americans, much less statues created as portraits of them as individual people with a name, a face, a personality, and a history. Generally, statues of Native Americans stand as generic symbols of the once unsullied Garden of Eden paradise, but finally conquered raw American Western frontier, portraying those who live by instinct, so it is said, obeisant to the forces of nature, with nature, like them, eventually crushed by the 19th century onslaught of the superior forces of technology driven relentlessly forward from sea to shining sea under the zeitgeist of manifest destiny. In the USA, the rare exceptions, to name a few, are those portrait sculptures of Tecumseh, sited at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, conceived originally as a figurehead for a ship, but then reconceived and revered by midshipmen as the Shawnee chief who led a multi-tribal confederacy of Indian nations in the 19th century, and who stands now on the training grounds of those who are to emulate him, and like him, live a life of a warrior and a leader defending their homeland. There is Crazy Horse, a monumental work in progress being carved into the Black Hills of South Dakota by Korzak Ziolkowski to commemorate the Lakota war leader who, in the words of Patton, emerged victorious at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. There is Ponca Chief Standing Bear, surveying the urban landscape of a park named for him in a city named for his tribe, Ponca City, Oklahoma, which successfully argued in the United States District Court in 1879 in Omaha that Native Americans are persons within the meaning of the law and have the right of habeas corpus to not be summarily removed against their will from one place to another by the United States government. There is Pocahontas, overlooking Jamestown, Virginia. She was the daughter of the Powhatan people who lived in the Tidewater region of Virginia, where I grew up as a child, famed for having saved an early colonist of Jamestown, John Smith, who we might call today a venture capitalist, And perhaps in so doing, she saved the entire British colonial enterprise by using herself as a shield, so it is said, to spare his life in 1607 when he was captured, by placing her head upon his when her father raised his war club to execute him. Last but by no means least, there is Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman who has been celebrated in bronze more than any other American, save for George Washington. The sculptures of her likeness standing at Dr. Drake's former alma mater or college where you worked. She is in 22 cities in the United States of America. As a Shoshone, like her relatives, the Comanches of Texas, she functioned as a trail guide, leading the way through the untamed wilderness of the Pacific Northwest for the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804 to 1806, as did the Comanche, or early European explorers over the seemingly featureless South Plains of Texas in the 16th through 17th centuries. And very few people are aware of that. Why so few sculptures of Native Americans, much less as individual portraits? Statues are very expensive. I talked to Jack Stevens of Iowa Park, who has created one of the finest statue groups of Native Americans in this country that stands in Barron's Landing in Wichita Falls, Texas. He was commissioned to replace the hand of a World War I veteran sculpture standing on the grounds of the courthouse in Kroll, Texas, and to replace the rifle of a sculpture of a Spanish-American war veteran in Vernon, Texas, and the foundry charged him $8,000 just for those two appendages or tools. It is a fact of human nature that generally, therefore, such expensive works are cast to honor the victors, or those who are their own tragic fallen, that people will then expend monies to commemorate records and statues of valor. What is unique about this statue, among all those of Native Americans in the U.S., once regarded by too many as a vanquished people, is that Quanah is standing upright, alert, watchful, and vigilant. I believe he's facing the east. Nowhere is there the whiff of defeat about his personage. Or, as his great-granddaughter Juanita Potaponi once pointed out to me, though deciding to retreat at the Second Battle of the Adobe Walls in 1874, when, wounded and outgunned, and to spare the lives of his remaining Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne warriors, fighting as allies with him, he was never defeated nor vanquished on the battlefield. He accepted Mackenzie's surrender orders and came into the reservation in 1875 of his own volition to spare his people from the certain extermination that Mackenzie told him they could otherwise expect. Regionally in Texas, the significance of this statue is that it represents one of only two efforts in the state to immortalize two specific Native American people in bronze, and interestingly, both are Comanche. In Fredericksburg, Texas, there is harbored a sculpture depicting Comanche Penateca chief Katemsi and German colonist John Nussbach passing the peace pipe between them in 1847 to seal negotiations for the only treaty made between Indians and white men that has never been broken. It is called Lasting Friendship by John Rester, 1996. And then there is Quanah Parker. There is one bust of Quanah overlooking the Palo Duro Canyon Amphitheater, where the play Texas is staged. It is carved there by Jack King Hill and was put there in 1970. There is one bas-relief monument depicting Quanah on the grounds of the Hardeman County Courthouse, and it was designed by Linda Willis Morris of the Willis Monument Company in 1988. But in the category of three-dimensional, full-figure, public art sculptures of Quanah Parker, there are only two others in the entire state of Texas. One in San Antonio, where Quanah, sculpted by artist Jim Reno in 1986, stands in company with 14 other Texans at the Convention Center. The other in Fort Worth at the historic Stockyards, sculpted by Jack Bryant in 1992. Additionally, this college not only is one of the few sites that has a sculpture of a Native American, but it is one of the only institutions of higher learning in the state, much less the United States, to so honor a Native American in this way. Only two other institutions of higher learning in Texas honor Native Americans, and these are figures that symbolize former college mascots, the Plains Indians. One is at Midwestern University in Wichita Falls, Texas, called Sunwatcher by Jack Stevens, made in 1997. The other is by Terry Gilbreth, the artist of this Quanah statue, and it is called Sacred Wind and was erected in 1992. Both are magnificent in their own right, but only this one is of a person we all know lived and breathed and commanded respect in history. In closing, Quanah Parker not only was a native son of Texas, but at the turn of the century he exemplified enlightened leadership by rising to meet the challenge of leading his people to successfully survive and adapt to lives straddling two worlds and two cultures, that of the Indian and that of the white man. Such attributes are those we seek to instill in younger generations that hail from more diverse backgrounds with each passing year. So it is only fitting that Western Texas College, an institution of higher learning, should see fit to honor a native Texan of Western Texas and such a versatile, enlightened leader of diverse ethnicity and background on its campus in the hopes that its students can derive inspiration from seeing Quanah standing in their midst every day watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Humphreys. Our next speaker represents the Scurry County Historical Commission, Mr. Drew Bullard. He's also a member of the Western Texas College Board of Trustees, president of the Scurry County Historical Commission. He's also a member of the Scurry County Museum Board. Mr. Bullard lives on his family ranch with his wife Carol, who is an art teacher at Snyder Primary. A warm welcome, please, for Mr. Drew Bullard.
This is a great crowd. Thank y'all for coming. Beginning in the year 1700, over 300 years ago, while the Western European inhabitants of the future United States were huddled on the east coast of the continent, there was a thriving Native American empire in the southern Great Plains, unknown and unimagined by those nestled in the forested east. That empire was the Comanche Empire. For 150 years, they imposed their will on their Spanish, Mexican, and trade and violence that harnessed the economic potential of other societies for their own use, enforced their borders, and persuaded their rivals to adopt and accept their customs and norms. Similar to English today, their language became the norm for trade and diplomacy on the southern plains. Scurry County was part of this Comancheria. Even today, the West Texas region is sparsely populated compared to the main urban centers of the United States. And consequently, we here in West Texas interact with the land and the natural environment with an understanding many other parts of the country do not possess. One thing we still share with the nomadic bands of Comanches who roamed Scurry County years ago is the beauty and unpredictability of the West Texas landscape. As you can see today, it's a beautiful day. Yesterday, it's been terrible. Our seasons offer abrupt changes, and even within a single day, we can have a prairie fire, dust storm, hailstorm, and a temperature drop of 30 degrees. Hunters here possess extensive knowledge of the land and animals, just as the Comanches did. In 1867, at Medicine Lodge Creek in Oklahoma, a treaty was made with several Indian tribes, and in exchange for food and supplies from the federal government and the right to hunt buffalo below the Arkansas River, these tribes agreed to live on reservations in Oklahoma and learn the language. Some Comanche chiefs signed the treaty, but not all. And it was not clearly understood by U.S. officials that no one chief spoke for a whole tribe, or even other bands within a tribe. Quanah Parker, a young, ambitious, but unproven Comanche warrior, attended this event and listened to a famous speech given by the influential Comanche chief Ten Bears to assembled dignitaries. Ten Bears said, "My heart is filled with joy when I see you here today, as the brooks feel the water when the snows melt in the spring. I feel glad as the ponies do when the fresh grass starts in the beginning of the year. But there are things you have said to me which I do not like. They were not sweet like sugar, but bitter like gourds. You said that you want to put us on a reservation to build us houses, to make us medicine lodges. I do not want them. I was born under the prairie, where the wind blew free and there was nothing to break the light of the sun. I was born where there were no walls and where everything drew free breath. I want to die there, not within walls. I know every spring and every wood between the Rio Grande and the Arkansas River. I have hunted and lived all over that country. I live like my fathers before me, and like them I live happily. If the Texans had kept out of my country, there might have been peace. That land which you say we must now live on is too small. The Texans have taken away the places where the grass grew thickest and the timber was best. If we kept that, we might have done as you asked. But it is too late. The whites took the country which we loved, and we wish only to wander the prairies till we die." With Ten Bear's words ringing in his ears, Quanah retreated to the remoteness of the Llano Estacado, the landmass, as most of you know here, which is Lubbock as a part, and to the rolling plains surrounding it, which is Scurry County, which includes Scurry County. This was the last refuge of the Comanches on the southern plains. Quanah was determined to become a powerful and respected warrior and drive the white man from his country. He fulfilled the first part of his vision, but though undefeated in battle by white soldiers, 8 years later he was finally forced to the reservation by the restless, relentless tide of white settlers, creating a new, more powerful empire than his own. On the reservation, Quanah became very close friends with the great open-range cattlemen of the time, such as Charles Goodnight of the JA and Bert Burnett of the 4 Sixes, all of which eventually owned vast acres in West Texas. They helped Quanah many times to navigate the white man's world, including the political bureaucracy, and often visited each other's homes for dinner and conversation. His rapport with these men was enhanced by their common love and understanding of the land. The initial encounter between Goodnight and Quanah illustrates this point. In 1878, 3 years after Quanah had come to the reservation in Oklahoma, reservation officials at last decided to allow the Comanches and Kiowas to go on a buffalo hunt. What the Indians found, however, were not herds of living animals, but plains strewn with buffalo skulls bleaching in the sun and decaying carcasses. In an effort to locate even a small herd, Quanah led a band of men, women, and children to the Paladoro Canyon. The big canyon with its sheltering walls, sacred cedar, and clear running water had once been one of his haunts, but now was owned by Charles Goodnight. not only a cattleman, but a former scout who had led the Texas Rangers and U.S. soldiers to Peace River, where Quanah's mother was recaptured from the Comanches. Goodnight rode out to meet Quanah's band, and the Indians were in a foul mood. 10 Comanche inquisitors surrounded Goodnight and his interpreter. They suspected him of being a Texan, and above all other enemies, the Comanches hated Texans. And always goes throughout any literature you read about Comanches. "Are you Tejano?" they asked. Knowing the bitterness toward Texans and knowing the Indians knew little about the United States as a whole, Goodnight replied, "No, I'm from Colorado." The Comanches immediately set out to disprove his statement and asked him about every prominent point and landmark in Colorado. Luckily, Goodnight had been on cattle trail drives from the Rockies to Texas and answered every question correctly. They were finally convinced he was no Tejano and were ready to negotiate a famous treaty with him, whereby Goodnight gave Quanah and his band 2 steers every other day until Quanah found where the buffalo were, and Quanah agreed to keep order among his warriors and protect the land. Quanah and Goodnight became lifelong friends. Goodnight, even in later years, gave Quanah purebred breeding stock so that he could improve his reservation herd. To determine his truthfulness, Quanah questioned Goodnight not about his motives or actions, but about his knowledge of the landscape. Quanah shared with the early cattlemen, and even those of us today, the love and understanding of the creeks, valleys, watering holes, landmarks, grassy plain, brilliant sunsets, windswept vistas, and the ever-changing, sometimes violent weather of West Texas. Let's look at the historical verifications showing Scurry County was part of Quanah's range. When Quanah was a youth of 18 or 19, he took a fancy to a young Indian maiden named Wakia, and she to him. However, it was the custom of the Comanches for the groom to offer horses to the father of the bride. The father had the final say whom his daughter would marry. By this time, Quanah's mother had been recaptured by the whites, and his father had died of wounds a few years earlier. Therefore, Quanah had no parents and only one horse. The son of the wealthiest man in the village also had his eye on Wakia and had offered 10 horses for her. Quanah's young warrior friends, who were also horse poor, got together and gave 9 horses to Quanah so that he could match the offer. However, the rich man's son raised his offer to 20 horses, which Wakia's father accepted. Both Quanah and Wakia were distraught, but it seemed that nothing could be done. However, in the middle of the night, Quanah and a group of 21 young warriors, with Wakia's help, kidnapped her from her father's tent and thundered off into the night, knowing that the possible result of capture was death. Quanah took the lead with Wakia next behind him and 21 men following in single file. For 7 hours, their horses did not break stride except to water or crossing streams. At daylight, the fugitives stopped to graze their ponies and eat a fine meal of dried buffalo meat. Often traveling by night, they frequently changed course, separated, came back together again at designated spots. In Texas, the band broke into couples, following an old Comanche trail for several nights, and reforming where 2 mountains were close together. From the physical description and accounts of his journey, these formations were likely Flat Top and McKenzie Mountains in Scurry County. You can see these off to the right of Highway 84 when going from Snyder to Lubbock, and most of you probably know where those are. There they stopped several days to refresh their horses and hunt game, which abounded in the region. And then they continued to their final rendezvous on the Concho River, the country around San Angelo. His angry pursuers were utterly unable to follow the trail, and the fugitives remained undiscovered in the Concho region for more than a year, and according to Quanah, just stole horses all over Texas. Eventually, however, Quanah's exploits became known, and the aggrieved Indian arrived to confront him. but became alarmed at the number of well-armed warriors surrounding Quanah. And so the two men gathered in the company of a court of chiefs to reach a compromise. It was decided Quanah owed 19 horses in compensation for his crime, and Quanah agreed, saying he knew of a ranch where he could procure that number in just a few hours, which he did. And this gave him the right to be accepted back to the tribe. A second historical reference to Quanah in the Scurry County area occurred after the Red River War in 1874, when the U.S. Army mounted a coordinated, organized campaign to drive the Comanches from West Texas. This campaign, Colonel Mackenzie Mountain and lots of other things, Mackenzie Trail, named for Skirl Mackenzie, forces routed the Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne encamped at the bottom of the Colorado Canyon. And though many of the warriors escaped up the walls of the canyon, he captured about 1,400 Indian horses and had his men shoot them so that the Indians could not steal them back from him as had happened in the past. The Indians had no choice but to walk through the reservation to survive the winter. Quanah and his Guada band were not there at that battle, but the handwriting was on the wall. And J.J. Sturm, an Indian translator, led by 3 Comanche guides who were familiar with the campsites favored by Quanah, was sent by Mackenzie from Fort Sill to find him and deliver orders to surrender, to come into the reservation or be destroyed. Mackenzie had hunted Quanah for years, but had been unable to capture him. Quanah had even stolen Mackenzie's beloved dappled gray warhorse, a magnificent charger, right out of his camp, and to add insult to injury, often rode the pacer on his raids. On May of 1875, Quanah was found to be camped out in the watershed of Bull Creek, which most of us know here know where Bull Creek is. This puts him in present-day Martin and Scurry County. And of course, in order to find grass and water for his band's horse herds, he would have wandered throughout the area. Even before Sturm's visit, Quanah recognized the futility of resisting the unstoppable power of the United States military. Canyon Blanco, Quanah went up on a mesa with a buffalo robe drawn over his head. For himself, he had rather die than surrender. But he pondered, should he lead his people also to their death? Down on the flat ground below the mesa, a rangy wolf turned his head toward Quanah and trotted off toward the northeast, toward Fort Sill. Above him, an eagle glided lazily and whipped his wings, also in the direction of the fort. These were signs from the Great Spirit, and Quanah obeyed. He would bring his people to the Comanche reservation in Oklahoma to learn the white man's ways. A lot of this is taken from Bill Meaden's book. It's this particular right here, who's here today and who has an excellent book about Quanah. This was in 1875. And Quanah was a young man when he went to the reservation, only about 29 years old. But while retaining his essential Comanche-ness, he would become a leader in helping the tribe transition to a new and radically different life. The third historical reference to Quanah in our area involves J. Wright Moore. In the summer of 1877, Quanah, with permission from Colonel Mackenzie, was allowed off the reservation to search for and convince renegade Indians to return to Fort Sill. In October of 1876, the summer of 1877, J. Wright Moore writes that he had set up a camp on the breaks of Deep Creek and worked the buffalo herds in that area. Moore's hunting range encompassed present-day Garza, Scurry, and Morgan counties. Quanah observed from a remote hillside Moore at work, dropping buffaloes from a great distance with his sharp rifle. And Moore, in his memoirs, recounts talking with Quanah about this feat years later, much as old football rivals discuss their past exploits. To detail Quanah's journey in the white man's world is beyond the scope of this talk, but he became a very successful businessman, encouraged his children and those of other Indians to become educated, negotiated with congressmen for tribal rights and with cattlemen for grazing rights, traveled to Washington, D.C. many times, met presidents, and including Teddy Roosevelt, who became his great friend and was generous to all those around him. Some might even say generous to a fault, because the Comanche way was to share among their people if they had goods. But he was generous to all, whether Indian or white. Quanah, the son of a Comanche chief and a captive white woman, was destined to straddle two very different worlds, and through strength of character was able to thrive in both.
Thank you, Drew. Representing the Parker family members, Bruce Parker is a great-grandson of Quanah Parker, the last chief of the Comanches. He was born in Oklahoma and currently lives at Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is retired from the U.S. Public Health Service after 39 years in various management positions, and is a member of the Comanche Nation and the Quanah Parker Historical Society. He is currently focused on Native Americans in the Southwest. Let us welcome Bruce Parker. Thank you. See what an honor it is to be here. First of all, I'd like to introduce my family, my wife, Nabs, and brother, Paul Davis, and his wife, Brenda, sister, Ardeth Fleming, Arthur Parker Fleming, and my brother, Don Parker, and younger sister, Debbie Parker. Well, I'd also like to say that it's an honor to be here in front of my favorite people. One being my new friend Bill Neely. I've talked to him several times on the phone, but have not had the opportunity to meet him in person. I look forward to a long relationship with him. And also Holly. I love Holly. Quanah's living great-grandsons. And by the way, my wife said, you get up there and you read this thing. Well, the last time you get up, you skip it over, and you touch here, and you touch there. So I said, well, okay, I'll do the best I can reading. Unlike some people, right? 11 years ago, I wrote mine last night. So again, I'm a member of the Comanche Nation. I'm a member of the Quahada Band, the Antelope Band, which is five major bands at this point. At one time, there was probably a dozen or more, and those amount of people moving from one family to another. So I didn't always stay with one band for the most part. My father was Gilbreth Parker. He was a grandson of Quanah Parker, and again a member of the Quahada. My grandfather was Baldwin Parker Sr. And he again was Quanah's son. He was a member of the Quahada Band. Great-grandfather was Quanah. He was married to, as you know, Cynthia Ann Parker, also a member of the Quahada Band of late. Prior to that, he was a member of the Tony Band, the Wanderers. Again, moving from place to place, band to band, ended up as a Quahada. They took his brother's last name. My great-great-grandfather was Gideon Quanah, the Tony Band, the Wanderer. My great-great-great-grandfather was Iron Jacket. Nobody knows much about him other than to say that he was part of the family. I'd like to briefly explain why we're here. In addition to celebrating this beautiful statue and recognizing the efforts that took place to get it here, we're here to honor our ancestors for their valor and for their sacrifices.
We're here to appreciate and review their lessons and to encourage the continued pursuit of and interest in Comanche activities in West Texas. Your children and ours must not forget the vision and the tenacity. West Texas is not an easy place to live in 200 years ago. I find that hard to believe. I thought it was nice. As one is a great descendant, Colin is a personal imperative to revere, protect, and preserve the young West Dakota state lands as an integral part of our past, present, and future. It also falls to me to ensure that Quanah is remembered not only as a warrior chief, but as a person. Quanah was a skilled statesman. Obviously, it didn't run through the entire family. Who understood the need for tolerance and acceptance of other cultures. He fought for religious freedom, and he founded the Native American Church, which defended its right to meet freely and openly. Most importantly, he chose peace over war as a road to the survival of his people. Historically, Comanche land extended from Kansas, Mexico, Colorado, and Texas. Wife doesn't like to hear it, but it includes Mexico as well, so she's from the Mexico. Comanches ruled the plains, including eastern Mexico, trading and raiding. The Apaches, Pueblos, and Navajos were no match for the Comanches. They ranged from the Rio Grande to the Red River to the Canadian River to the Pecos River. The most moving, personally, and historically significant sites that we've been to, we had the opportunity to visit here in Texas, in West Texas. Last year, I believe it was the year before, we were invited to a ranch north of Gale. On that piece of land, there's a tree. It's called a marker tree. The natives past used to as direction many years ago. They were bent over, they were tied to the ground. They pointed to a number of different things. It could have been a trail, it could have been water, it could have been pasture, it could have been just about anything. We saw the tree, took us to the tree. It's not a it. He showed us this tree. The tree is a palm tree. It was 13 and a half feet in circumference. We were in awe of that tree. He said, "It's nothing." He said, "Up the creek here, I think it was Bull Creek. Up the creek," he said, "there was another tree, 18 feet in circumference. But the drought got it died." So we were again honored to be in the presence of that tree, because it told a story that we've not heard before. I believe the DNA was checked on trees. There was not a local tree elsewhere, some other place. So it was quite an honor to take it to that site. Recently, like last year, we were invited by just outside of Gale, the Ojibwe Peak, he said. We'd like him to come out and bless the peak. Bless him on the peak. That being the area where Quanah gave up 1875 to Mackenzie's emissary. They led him back to Fort Sill. It was quite an honor. He invited us in us up that. Some of us almost didn't make it back down, which is it's quite a walk. But it said that we were the first Comanches to be on that peak in 145 years. So I think that is quite an honor. It's very spiritual. You can imagine the experience. One of my favorite books is Myth, Memory, and Massacre. Probably seen it. Written by proved to be not a battle, it was a massacre. When the military and the Rangers came in, swooped in, and killed women and children. Killed women and children. Wasn't bad. Of course, that's where Cynthia Ann was located. Taken back to her family down in East Texas. We were invited several years ago to the Pease River, where Mule Creek runs into the Pease River, and that's where the massacre took place. And at that meeting, there were Tom Crum invited some other artists and historians and different people. I was there, Don was there, Paul was there, and a couple of our brothers were there as well. So I was leaving Albuquerque. I asked my wife, I said, "Hey, we're going to take my shotgun." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, the soldiers and the Rangers came down and killed all those Comanches. There's still people around. Maybe they want to finish the job off." She said, "No, leave the shotgun at home." Because not in hunting season. Several other things I'd like to touch on, but like a lot of people, I just don't have a lot of words in my mouth. My dad, several years ago, in the late 70s, was driving across Texas, Panhandle, New Mexico, going to Oklahoma. And my dad had a heavy foot, so he was speeding along. Red light came on behind him. Pulled over and stopped. And the highway patrolman looked at him and said, "License and insurance, the whole business." My dad showed him. "Parker, huh?" "So are you related to Quanah Parker?" He said, "Yes, sir, it's my grandfather." He said, "Well, I want you to know that my grandfather was a ranger. He chased your grandfather all over the Panhandle." Finally, I'd like to extend a special thanks to all you who are stewards of this land, sacred land, the Comanche land. And the fine people of Texas for keeping not only the history of Quanah alive, but its spirit. Also the college for embodying the necessity for education, and especially the museum for honoring Quanah's love of art, beauty, and education. This magnificent statue. The Parker family and the Comanches will be forever grateful. As I've told my wife several times, I may have lived in Oklahoma, be from Oklahoma, maybe living in New Mexico in my heart. It's here in Texas. So with that, I'll close and get on the program. Thank you very much for having us. We appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. The creative spirit has always been a part of Terry Gilbreth's life. By the time he graduated from Abilene High School in 1964, he had made the choice to become an artist. We're certainly glad of that. And had a blossoming talent for drawing, painting, and sculpture. He attended McMurray University in Abilene, Texas, graduating in 1968. Mr. Gilbreth has been a board member of the American Indian and Cowboy Artist and a member and president of the National Western Artist Association and the Texas Cowboy Artist Association. He is represented by galleries in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and has been under contract to Danbury Mint. Terry Gilbreth lives and works in Abilene, Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the artist, Terry Gilbreth.
I'm a sculptor. Evidently, Mike Grieve is a storyteller. I couldn't have been happier when Mike and them approached me the day that I was commissioned to do this piece. And even though it turned into too much of a task for me, it seems, it still has been a blessing. Thank you. I went, first of all, to find out anytime you're called upon to do something, you must know about it. So I went to it's just east of Fort Sill. I think it's in Mears, Oklahoma. It's a SIA organization where they have a raptor program where they breed raptors in captivity. They also are custodians of the eagle feathers for all the nation, all the native people. And as I studied, they are also in custodians of several artifacts of the Quanahs, besides the raptor. So Stuart Campbell, a friend of mine from Lubbock, who's a painter, and I went up to visit the fellows at CO. And he very graciously said to us as we got ready to leave, he said, "Come here a minute, I want to do something special." He said, "You guys have shown me more concern than I can get out of my own people." He said, he took out a folded blanket, and out of the middle of it was Quanah Parker's feather paint. And he said, "I want to give you a blessing." And while 20 birds set up around us in his courtyard on pedestals, he lit the sacred sage and blessed us with smoke. So I was able to garnish enough material from that visit and several more over a period of time to do what I thought was a great, or capable at least, representation of the Quanah culture. And I tried to position him where he was just about to mount his horse. And evidently he's equipped with the battle paraphernalia. And he would get on that horse, maybe rising early in the morning. The winds of West Texas is whipping his loincloth and stuff. And he would feel the vigor of a man about to go out and defend his home. And those times ahead of him that were all about watching his world crumble. So time after time, not much has been said about the horse. My goodness, the Comanches were just a loose group of gatherers until the Spanish were there. They owned the horse. So many times he climbed on his horse and fought battles with everybody. That's what I've tried to depict. It's my deepest wish that the people of Scurry County will enjoy this piece. Thank you.
At this time, we're going to come to the closing part of our program with, I think, what's going to be a real treat. Before the Bruce Parker and the Parker family members come and they offer a Comanche blessing, I'd like to remind everybody that after the close of the program, there is a reception in the Scurry County Museum. To your left, right here to my right, as many of you already know, there'll be a reception there to follow this, and certainly you're all invited. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Western Texas College Foundation and Western Texas College for allowing me to participate in this event today in just such even a small way. I don't know why, but the words of my daddy, if he were still here, come to mind, and he just looked at me and said, "Boy, you're in tall cotton now." So when I look around at everybody, so it's I've had what a wonderful time, what a great honor. So thank you for letting me be here. Anyway, at this part, we'll close with a Comanche blessing. This part.
We're going to do a couple of things for the actual blessing itself. We have Paul has written a poem. I think will depict Quanah, what he was doing, where he was at, and his life. So it's very important. There'll be a couple other things that Don will be singing some songs after a while. Paul will be helping with some other things. So I'm not speaking for them. They'll probably talk to you themselves as they go along. So, and then we'll do the actual blessing right at the tail end.
It's kind of tough to follow a bunch of these speakers here and hear about when all your stuff was written. I got you beat. Mine was 18 years ago. We're gonna, excuse me. I've heard many things that are in here that you've already heard, but if y'all just bear with me, I hope you can grasp it. And someone said a while ago, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was, talked about standing over here and feeling the spirit that got a hold of you. So far today, I've just walked by it and feel the same thing. And hopefully this poem that I wrote several years ago will kind of blend in with that. Number one, the title of it is Quanah Parker, His Spirit Lives On. And so we'll see if we can get through this. Quanah Parker, as near as we can see, was born around 1852, at least prior to 53. His mother, Cynthia Ann, a captive girl, was she. His father, Peter Nocona, a hunter, a warrior, a true Comanche. Not much is known about Quanah's life before 1875, but as history tells us now, his goals were to see his people survive. Quanah's Comanches were known as the Lords of the South Plains. They escaped the threats from the cavalry time and time again. Quanah led his people through winter's cold and summer's sweltering heat, chasing after the buffalo herd that provided them with meat. Sorry folks, I think this wind has got me. High up on a mountainside or in the valley far below, when Quanah raised his head, his people were ready to go. The Quahada band of the Comanches was led by our grandfather's hand. They controlled Comancheria, a Spanish name given to the land. Anyone daring to enter there was met with a fierce attack. At first their aim was not to kill, but merely drive them back. Quanah had gathered some warriors, even some from another tribe. He asked for their help to stop some buffalo hunters if with him they would ride. To a Texas panhandle town they would go, a place called Adobe Walls. It was here that Quanah's horse would be shot, causing him to stumble and fall. It was June the 27th, 1874, and Quanah led the warriors out like so many times before. At Adobe Walls, the buffalo hunters had really ranted and raved about the thousands of buffalo they killed, not caring if even one was saved. While traveling to Adobe Walls, a memorial song was sung, because they knew that for some of the warriors, the bells of heaven would be rung. As they charged the walls at dawn that day, the battle was not very long. But as Quanah rode his horse in circles all the warriors sang his medicine song. Quanah took cover behind the horse, as on the ground he lay. Rescued by a comrade, he will live another day. Carried by Comanche ponies that were always swift in flight, again the warriors of Quanah's band escaped into the night. Eshtai, the medicine man, had assured them that his war paint was bulletproof, but early in battle several Indians were killed, rendering the paint to be a spoof. The medicine man's explanation was someone had killed a skunk for meat. He said that act rendered the paint useless and led to the Indians' defeat. The ride back to the village was long and tiresome, with many a heavy heart. The range and accuracy of the buffalo rifles had been beaten from the very start. This time the memorial song held sadness, but was still sung with honor and pride. The sorrow was not for the lost battle, but for their brothers who had bled and died. Many of the settlers who came said they were only passing through, but a short time later the U.S. government sent the cavalry dressed in blue. Their orders were to take the Comanches any way they can and take them to Oklahoma to live on reservation land. Many times they tried, many times they failed. They found themselves hungry, cold, and tired as again they lost Quanah's trail. Another time Quanah showed him he wasn't quite smart old scamp. He stampeded a herd of buffalo through the middle of Mackenzie's camp. A severe drought from June to September kept the Quahada ponies poor. At last, Colonel Mackenzie's scouts found the Paladura's door. Most of the Indians' ponies were killed, over 1,000 in all, but Quanah and the Comanches escaped on foot up the canyon wall. After escaping the Paladura with very few horses to ride, the people were suffering badly from the bitter cold outside. No way to run the buffalo down, which provided them with meat. To save his people now, it was surrender or suffer defeat. Being the kind of man he was, Quanah prayed and he asked for help. He looked up and saw a circling bird, then heard the eagle squeal. The sound he heard was the eagle's voice, loud, clear, and shrill. This was the son he was looking for. Take the people and go to Fort Sill. After he came to the reservation, the government quickly learned that Quanah had many Comanche traits that had not yet been spurned. Standing tall against the Indian agents, Quanah just could not be moved, until at last the demands for his people, the agents finally approved. Too many wives, the agents said. That's one thing he'd done. Quanah simply said, that's fine, you go tell them which ones. History does not tell us what action the agents took, but I'll wager they had second thoughts when they saw Quanah's look. The government asked Quanah to convince his people to walk the white man's road. They assured him if he would just do that, they would help him carry the load. So Quanah traded his buckskins for a watch with a gold chain, a suit, and a felt hat of black. But his hair was still braided, and the two long braids were worn down the center of his back. Quanah lived his life with one foot on the white man's road and the other on the old Comanche trail. He continued this way, even to the end, as the sickness made his body grow frail. He served as a judge in Indian courts and to his Comanche people as chief. Either way, he could still help his people when they were stricken with troubles and grief. As a businessman, Quanah took the horse by the reins. He made investments in horses, cattle, land, and trains. But even with success and failure too, he didn't let his life get good. He still had his goals set on helping others that a man might have been less fortunate than him. Quanah became a great leader of religion in the Native American church. The government tried to ban the peyote, but it always disappeared during the search. Quanah spoke to the white preachers and he told them, you need to take another look, because the things we get from our meeting in the teepee are the same that you get from your book. In a long, hard search to locate his mother's remains, he found them buried down in East Texas, a long way from the plains. With very little help from most folks around, Quanah finally obtained permission to have them removed from the ground. Cynthia Ann's remains, those of Prairie Flower, were reinterred in Oklahoma, where they remain this very hour. Quanah lived a remarkable life, from the plains to the reservation, from a half-breed boy orphaned before his teens to the chief of the Comanche Nation. While death took his mother and father, and his brother and sister too, when burdened with heartaches that life had dealt him, it was his faith that helped him pull through. Now, so many years ago, the days have passed us by. Each year we gather at their monument and we look up toward the sky. We sing, we talk, and we bow our heads and pray. We ask for strength and guidance that we might join them there one day. Our grandfather spirit watches over us down here upon the land. He waits for us to join him as he holds to Jesus' hand. I'm sorry, y'all hang on a second. In February of 1911, Quanah was laid to rest. All the Comanche Nation knew that he had given his very best. And today, as you stand in front of Star House, the building that was Quanah's home, from the things that you see and the feeling you get, you will know that his spirit lives on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We're now going to be serenaded by Brother John Parker. He's going to sing us a song. He'll explain to you what the song is all about.
We were just talking about the Adobe walls and how that battle went. And this song is about hey ya